Okay, so Michael, well done on your lesson. I was really impressed with how many times you offered the students chances to interact with the material before they needed to do the worksheets on their own. When you had the story circle time, you had plenty of chances for the students to know exactly what to expect because you read them the questions, you asked them the questions of what they expected would be the answers to the questions. And then even after you read the story, you went back and reviewed several of the questions that were on the worksheet. So I felt like you really set up the students well for being able to complete the worksheets on their own. Um, one of the one of the overall aspects of your lesson that I think you might be able to improve is about maintaining a positive atmosphere at all times. You were often giving feedback, positive feedback, but though your enthusiasm with the words that you were saying felt exactly the same as all the other words around it. So I think many of the students didn't understand that you were actually praising them, even when you were saying things like, oh, good job, or great, or thank you. Um, I think that you need to add a little more oomph or energy to those moments so that the students can really feel that you are praising them and that they know that they're doing a good job. Um, did you did you feel anything when you were trying to give praise? Was there anything that was holding you back from doing that?
Well, I guess mainly it was I was afraid that I would use up too much time um, praising them. So I should have put in some more enthusiasm into that. But as we were going along, I sort of forgot to do that, and I got into the habit of just perhaps praising them too quickly without enough enthusiasm.
Yeah, I can understand that. And like I said, from the outside and reviewing the lesson, I could tell that you were trying to praise them at times. But I think it didn't have the same feeling that you were trying to portray. Your words were positive, but the atmosphere itself was not positive. Um, I think one of the contributing factors to that was you were often trying to reinforce the rules and the procedures of your classroom, mainly that students needed to raise their hand in order to speak and that they were not to speak out of turn. I think it's great that you have that procedure in the classroom, and you should keep that procedure in the classroom. But I felt many students were trying to interact with you or get your attention, um, but you didn't always respond to them in a positive way because they had not raised their hand or they were talking over somebody else. And I wonder if there's a way that you can redirect that enthusiasm that they are offering you instead of shutting it down by saying, shh, or not now, or quiet, or raise your hand. I wonder if you could find some nonverbal cues that might help them to understand what they should be doing in order to contribute. Because they're speaking to you, they're contributing to the conversation because they must like you, they must have a good feeling about your relationship. But I'm worried that over time, you might start to shut that down by your reactions to them without giving them a chance to express themselves because they're very eager to speak with you. What do you think are some possibilities of ways that you can accept their contributions even when they haven't raised their hand or they were
Mm.
speaking over somebody else?
Yeah, so in this lesson, I must have gotten sidetracked and I just forgot how to properly do that. But usually, what I do is when a student tries to quote unquote speak out of turn or not raise their hand, I and they show enthusiasm or I know that they know the answer, I give them a thumbs up or a smile, and then I sort of raise my hand and point to it and then point to a student who is raising their hand and call on them, and the very next time the student who I had to correct raises their hand and doesn't just blurt out the answer, I will choose them right away.
Oh, terrific. I
So
think that's a really great plan. I think you're right on track with that. If you can remember to do those things each time the situation comes up. Maybe in this lesson on this day, you started to get a little bit frustrated or exasperated, or like you said, just sidetracked and distracted yourself, and you forgot to follow that procedure that you had already established. I like the idea of doing the thumbs up. I like the idea of you raising your hand yourself. I think that's a great cue. In this sort of conversation-based lesson where you're going back and forth about the material, I think it's important that you don't interrupt your flow of what the topic is by stopping to reprimand somebody or to talk about the rules and things, because it's not actually the topic of the Wright brothers and the book that you were reading together, but instead it became about coaching somebody's behavior or misbehavior. If you can keep with those nonverbal cues, I think you'll be right on track for that. I would be interested to see a lesson again, perhaps in a week or two, so that in the meantime, you have a chance to perhaps catch yourself now that we've had this conversation, and see how you might be reacting, whether it's positive or neutral or negative reactions to students when they're speaking out of turn. I know that in your mind you already have a plan of how you're going to handle that, and I hope that you'll be able to stick with that plan. But first, I think you're going to have to take some time to observe yourself and see, what are my true reactions in the moment? Am I being overcome by my own emotions when I
Yeah,
know that the students are out of turn? And
yeah,
if you
that's
feel
actually
that, then you can go back to your plan because you know what the plan should be. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that's actually a great point. Self-reflection is key. Um, it's true that you can get lost in your own teaching, and you think that you're praising the kids enough or you're paying enough attention to all of the students, but then when you look back or somebody lets you know that in fact you did not, that can be a real eye-opener. It can be very helpful for just improving in the future.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you have such a positive view of that. Sometimes people can feel very anxious about the idea of self-reflection or of any feedback, whether it's for themselves or it's from somebody else about their work. But I'm glad that you're keeping such a good positive reaction to that. I think your
Thank
students are
you.
really lucky to spend time with you, and it was a good lesson, but I think that you want to be careful that you don't lose track of your positivity. Over time, it might start to wear things down. But right now, you have a really good relationship with your students.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. I think you did a great job.
Thanks. Okay, see you again. Okay, Dale, so I just have a few comments about your class. Overall, I thought it was pretty good. You did a lot of things correctly, in my opinion. First of which was that you asked a lot of questions, which is great. And more than that, you always elicited feedback each time you asked a question.
Mm.
So again, I like that you were talking a lot, and in turn, the class also spent a lot of time speaking. One thing that I will mention is that you did not ask every student a question. Some students did not speak at all during your lesson, and some students spoke a lot more than others.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
I think I was
yes?
kind of nervous about the camera in the room, and myself, I was eager to have students speaking and participating, so those that were raising their hands or wanted to speak, I immediately called on them without having any dead time in the classroom to wait for other students to have that, to want to talk about it. So yeah, I'm sure that probably happened. I didn't get to every child.
Yeah, I know the pressure. I know how much the pressure can be when you know you're being watched or recorded. That's true. Again, just maybe keep it in mind next time. But yeah, it happens to me as well. your body language was clear in communicating to your students that they were on the right track. And I found your manner of speaking and tone to be also good. However, maybe you could have demonstrated a little bit more enthusiasm in praising your students. But overall, I think you made up for that in the use of your body language.
Mm, yeah,
Um,
I felt
yeah.
like I wanted to be there, and I was happy to be there and to do the lesson with them. I felt like I was giving them positive feedback that they needed, but I mean, in reviewing it on video, I think you're right that I didn't actually say the words that much, but I felt like we were having good back and forth, and I suppose I lost track of giving that positive feedback through positive words. I'm glad that at least my body language and facial expressions could show it, though.
Yeah, no, overall, I thought it was very good. Maybe it's just a small thing to point out.
Mm.
Um, about later on in your lesson, I noticed that you you sort of did an exercise and about blurbs where you read and discussed blurbs with the class. I think that was good. That was a little bit of a change of pace, doing something different, but I think perhaps it could have been a bit more, it could have been expanded upon, maybe with a game or with a different activity, maybe taking it a step further where students create their own blurbs, just something to change up the pace of the class, of the lesson.
Mm. Yeah, to be honest, it took a little longer than I expected for the students to read through the blurbs and for me to make sure that they understood what was in them. If I had I don't know if I had a game or another activity, what would you suggest that I could have done other than having us read through the blurbs for comprehension?
Mhm. Okay, so you mentioned the fact that you were stressed about the time frame and about having enough time to complete the lesson, make sure the students understood. Um, a simple game that I find students of almost any age love, especially young students around grades 1 to 5, is what I call the board slap game or the hammer game. So um, let's say, for example, you have 3 blurbs on the board, and you ask students to first read and you check for comprehension, and then you have a list of questions. For example, you say, okay, which story or which blurb is about a fantasy book? And you have 2 students at the front of the class, and they race to the board, touch, and say whatever you want. For example, this one, or this is about a fantasy book. Then they touch it, they say the first one to win, the first one to touch the board, the correct blurb, and to give the correct answer wins. And you can do that very quickly with many different questions, and maybe in a matter of a couple of minutes, you can have all of the students take a turn depending on how many students are in your class.
Yeah, and it was a small enough class that we could do something like that. Um, you're right, that would be kind of a good dessert at the end of the lesson for them to, know that we've made it to the end and we can have a little fun with the material. I can definitely find a way to include some more activity or some games. It was static now that I think about it. We were just sitting down at the desks and then we sat down on the floor.
Well, anyways, Dale, I enjoyed your class, so thank you for letting me observe. And
Great. Thank you for your feedback. Yeah, it's nice to have somebody else take a look at it. I, I, I definitely have things to improve, so thanks for offering me some suggestions.
no problem. Okay, anytime, Dale. Thank you.
Great, thank you.